Good to see everyone. Thanks for sticking with us for the last session, and I'm hoping this can really have a positive impact on your life. So when Ryan invited me to talk about sabbaticals, he invited me to this conference. I was like, it's a marketing conference-ish. The first feeling I had in my stomach was like a clench, because I thought back to my time in business school. So I went to Harvard Business School, and they're famous for the case study method. So you'll read a case about a company and a dilemma they have, and then you'll discuss it. And you're sitting in a classroom, and there's 90 people, and unless you're a total egomaniac, which, let's be honest, there's a lot of them there, you're assuming that you're kind of like the dumbest person in the room. So how they open up each of the cases is with what they call a cold call. So basically, you're sitting there, and the professor's looking around, and they're like, what did you think of the case? What's going on here? Start the class up. And so I had not gotten cold called, and we're doing this marketing class, so this is the marketing tie-in, and we're doing a case on Propecia. And so I'm sitting there, and the professor goes, DJ, how did you feel when you lost your hair? And luckily, everyone in the class was like, boo, like, they had my back, like, oh my God, what an awkward question. And but it got me thinking about like the role of marketing. And so they really hit at something that was super important to me, right? It was extremely impactful in my life. It hit on a lot of like nerves that you think about what someone's looks are and things like that. Luckily, one of my classmates kind of reached out to save me. She goes, well, in Germany, we say that the reason you go bald is because you have so much testosterone, it pushes out your hair. I'm not sure if anyone went to the CrossFit yesterday morning. Anyone go to that? So if that were true, I think Kurt would have absolutely no hair, and I would be like covered in hair and wouldn't have to wear a shirt. Like that guy has got some testosterone. But so after that, like we had this marketing piece, and I came to business school to try to make a difference in the world. I wanted to be someone that did something globally. I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, and I wanted to do something that made a difference. And I was lucky to find a professor who had done research on how can you give access to finance to people in places where there's no credit bureaus. So like Indonesia, Kenya, Peru, how can you provide a FICO score? Fast forward 7 years later, I had founded my dream company. We had enabled over $2 billion in capital to go to over 1 million entrepreneurs that did not have access to finance. I was on the cover of the New York Times. They'd written 2 Harvard Business School cases. And you can probably tell where this is going, but I picked my head up, and I was completely burnt out. There's a poem by T.S. Eliot called The Hollow Man, appropriately, and the line from it is, this is how the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. And that was how my kind of burnout came. It wasn't some like dramatic event. It was me on the couch Friday night. It was like 9 p.m., and thanks to DoorDash, I'm not sure if Kofi's still here, I was like, oh man, I just need an ice cream sandwich. And so I went on DoorDash, I ordered an ice cream sandwich, and I'm like, I can't just get one ice cream sandwich. This Dasher is going to think I'm a total loser. So I ordered 3 ice cream sandwiches. So it comes, I'm like, thanks, man. I eat 2 ice cream sandwiches. I put the rest in the fridge, and it's like the pizza box fridge dilemma, where you can't like fit it in. You're trying to. I wake up the next morning, the whole fridge had defrosted. My kitchen floor was ruined. Everything had leaked. And I was like, I think this is the signal that I needed to take time off. So luckily, my co-founder and I, were able to kind of create this policy. I went on sabbatical, and burning out from your dream job is something that we don't really have as a narrative, or at least I didn't have. I think things have changed a lot in the last few years. You think about burning out from like working in banking or consulting, some job you hate, and you're working hard at it, and you don't want to do it anymore. But what happens when you find the thing, like the previous speaker was talking about, that you want to do, and then you burn out? So I didn't know, but I set off. And I wanted to do things that were important, but never urgent. So my mom was in a bad state of health. I wanted to focus on the spiritual side. That's rarely important. It's very rarely urgent, but usually quite important. And I never had time for it. So I spent 4 months. I did a walking pilgrimage around Japan, a bunch of other things, wrote and performed my first song. These things that just don't sound that awesome, but are really important to me. And I came back, and it totally transformed my life. I realized that I had to take off and leave my company. Would it be more successful without me? Would it be less successful? That chapter was kind of over. And more importantly, everyone I talked to who had taken a sabbatical had similar experiences. They said to a T, this is the most important experience of my life. It changed my life. And having founded a company based on social science research, I was like, where's the information out here about this? Like, if it's so powerful, how come you just see someone's blog post about them in Bali on the beach or something? So I set out to work with a couple professors to do research on the subject, and now I'm writing a book about it. And so the reason why I wanted to bring it to y'all is this kind of seems like a marketer's dream, right? It's this thing that 100% of people that have done say is life-changing. It doesn't cost very much, right? It's totally customizable. So every single person can have their own little customizable thing. And everyone who does it says it's a peak life experience, up there with getting married, having a kid. And it's available to anyone with enough planning, advice, and inspiration. The problem is, it doesn't cost much, so it's free. So how do I personally, make money selling it? That's a little bit of an issue for a marketer. But more importantly, it flies in the face of our story about what a successful life is, right? And the most important finding from our research is that having an example of someone who's taken a sabbatical, is the number one kind of explanatory variable about whether people feel like they have permission to take a sabbatical. So what I want to do is I want to help y'all kind of come up with this little bit of an idea of a kernel. I view what I'm doing here as kind of planting a seed about a sabbatical. I don't think it's going to bloom right away, so bear with me. I hate it when speakers ask me to do this, but please close your eyes. So everyone here was at the gala last night. Imagine yourself walking up the stairs to the gala. You're like, oh shit, I'm late. You're walking up the stairs, there's no one around you. You walk up. You open the door, and instead of a bunch of folks from the conference, though there might be some, you're seeing all sorts of people who are meaningful to you. Seeing family members, both who are with us and who aren't. You're seeing friends, you're seeing peers, you're seeing colleagues, you're seeing your kids. And you realize that up on that board is not Tony's name, but it's yours. What are people saying about you? What's the impact that you actually had on people's lives? How are they talking about you as someone that's courageous, that sucked the marrow out of life? So I encourage you, as you drive back or fly back to where you're going, maybe you can do a little journaling about this, because obviously you can't do it in 30 seconds. But if you have something that's kind of in your mind about, if I had some extra time with these folks, what would I want to do? I want you to kind of hold on to that as we go through this. So being a person that's done some marketing and obviously done okay in that hair loss case, I thought about, as I talked to people over the course of the week, what are the different archetypes? What are the different kind of customers of folks in the room? So I think there's three that I kind of identified. One are those of you that have this company hat on. You're like, I am a person of this company. If you cut my arm, I bleed Chobani yogurt. I'm fully committed. The second are what I call hard chargers. Super type A, been successful, on to the next thing, type A. And the third is what I call people on the edge of the pier. So you're maybe you're a little burnt out, maybe you've been thinking about taking time off, thinking about the next thing. And truth be told, you're probably a blend of all three. But so I'm going to try to speak to each of these personas, each of these archetypes. Those of you who wear the company hat, probably your biggest concern is, how could I possibly take time off? The team would fall apart, the company would fall apart. If you're on a board, if you're an investor, you're like, there's no way we're going to let our leader take time off, it'll collapse. What we found from the research, so over the last 3 years interviewing hundreds of folks from all over the world, people return from sabbatical more creative, more confident, more comfortable taking risks, because, they just took a huge risk, right? At least perception-wise. And those who were given a sabbatical policy from their company come back more loyal, because they see that their company kind of sees them as a whole human being, right? Greater tenure, they're more likely to refer other people to the company. Now, the common story is not folks taking a sabbatical, but think about some folks that I think people in this room would identify with, and and think of as mentors. So Stefan Sagmeister has a creative studio that he famously shuts down every 7 years for inspiration, travel, the whole organization. He's got a great TED Talk about sabbaticals, if you haven't heard it. Steve Jobs studied calligraphy for a year, came back. We all know how that went. So, what I would ask is, when you think about what would happen if the company, if the company lost its leader or lost someone in management or lost the frontline person, have you built that company in a way that can withstand you leaving? If you're really that concerned about it, then that means you haven't, and that's a huge problem, because everybody leaves at some point, right? And they're either going to leave with a bunch of advance notice, having kind of tidied things up and practiced giving your tasks off to someone else, or they're going to leave you in the lurch. This should be a natural thing, people leaving companies and coming back, not an unnatural thing. I was talking last night to Tyler at Zappos, and he was saying they made this big kind of company change, I can't remember, 5 or 10 years ago, where they basically flattened the entire organization. So they said, no more managers. If you don't like this and you want to leave, fine. We'll pay you a month's salary for every year you've been here, and we'll give you an extra year of healthcare and benefits on top of that. So if this isn't for you, great, find your own way. And so the headline you might have seen was 26% or whatever the number has resigned in a mass protest against this new policy. But what really happened is that 70x% of people chose to stay there instead of getting a year plus, 2 years of benefits and salary. And what they found is that those people who chose to stay, who are actively choosing to be someplace, that had a huge impact on their productivity, on their engagement, on their success. And the other thing that the media didn't report on was that out of those folks who left, 20% actually ended up coming back. So they called them, I think, Zoomerangs or Zoomers or something. And so think about those folks. I mean, can you really blame folks for wanting to leave, try something else, and potentially come back? This is your one life, right? If they've worked for the same company for the whole time, can you blame them for wanting to see if that's truly what they wanted to do? And can you welcome them back with open arms? Talking about key person risks, artists from Big Brother, Big Sister, that organization doesn't work unless they have codified in there the way for it to hand down from leader to leader to leader. And the last thing from folks with the company hat on, I was talking to James from Righteous Gelato, and of course he has a sabbatical policy at his company. His motto is, build a company that your parents would want to work for. And ironically, after a few years, his dad came to him and said, listen, I see you go to work and you're super happy. Can I have a job? And so his dad now works for them, and his dad is qualifying for his sabbatical now. James got the chance to take his sabbatical with his wife, spend 6 weeks doing a honeymoon. Think about it, you're getting married, you're going to spend the rest of your life with someone, and our cultural kind of ritual is squeeze it in, maybe do a quick honeymoon. Oh, we didn't have time for the wedding and the honeymoon, we're going to do it next year. You got to have 6 weeks to celebrate that with this partner. Okay, so for the hard chargers. The bad news is, in our research, we found that 2/3 of people who go on sabbatical did it because of some tragedy. So they didn't choose to go on sabbatical, a sabbatical chose them. The first person I talked to when I came into the gathering a few days ago was JL. She's the COO of Communo. And whenever I talk to someone about what I'm doing, I always have this moment of fear where I'm like, are they going to think I'm a joke? I'm like a guy studying vacations? Or are they going to say that you're working on something tremendously valuable? And luckily, she was the latter. So she said, oh my God, I took a sabbatical. It changed my entire life. I was like, okay, tell me more. She's driving to work, COO of another company, driving to work, and all of a sudden she noticed that her whole left side was completely numb. So she was like, I either drive to work or I go to the hospital. So she went to the hospital, never came back to that job again. They were like, listen, you were this close to having a probably fatal heart attack, and you're pushing yourself too hard. She was able to offload her responsibilities and move on. And that started what she called her year of surrender. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't love to go on a year of surrender, right? You wouldn't plan, I think I'm going to surrender and just but that was what she needed. And so she had not been used to not having control over her life, what she did, power over herself. So over the course of that year, this is someone who was a near Olympic swimmer, who's been a COO for her entire career. She was floating the Pacific Ocean with her goddaughters. She was spending time abroad with her partner. She was writing, not working at all. And, does anyone care that she did that? Absolutely not. That's kind of what landed her this job. Someone saw that she was off. When she was ready, she took the job. So another kind of famous Harvard Business School professor is this guy by the name of Clay Christensen. When we graduated, like 12 years ago, he was set to give the speech at the end to all of our graduating class. Unbeknownst to us, he had just been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And so he was supposed to encapsulate what his learnings were and kind of send us off a graduation speech. And instead, he kind of slowly made it clear that he had received this diagnosis. And his advice to us was kind of applying his business principles to life, which was, listen, he had sat at the 5-year, the 10-year, the 15, the 20-year reunion and seen his classmates and who attends those reunions change over time. So the 5 and 10-year, people are coming like, I'm the CEO of this. I got this much investment. 10, 15-year, starting to bring their kids, talk about family. But then he noticed that some of the people that were so successful in the early reunions weren't coming anymore. And so as part of his research, he reached out to them and he said, hey, I noticed you haven't come. What's wrong? And what he found was that people were ashamed, not because of their business success, but because of their family failures. And so how Clay talks about this is, we all respond to incentives, right? Like that's what we're here for. That's kind of what marketing and sales is. And it's really easy to respond to the incentives that are right in front of you. So you have quarterly goals. If I stay an extra hour, we finish this presentation, we close this deal. But there's no like quarterly goals. There's no bonuses for, coming home and having dinner with your family. And so over time, you kind of focus more on work, less on personal life, and you can't start over at the end and say like, hey, I know I wasn't there for dinner for 15 years, but I'd like to rebuild our relationship. That's not how it works. And so, for those hard chargers, I would suggest that if you don't take time off will probably take you. And if you don't have a plan for it, it's not going to go the way that you would like it to go. At dinner last night, I ran into Scott O'Neill. Did anyone have the chance to go to his session? And I found out pretty quickly that he had gone on. I think he called it garden leave. He had also called it like a pilgrimage or something like that. But he had taken time off, right? And when you Google him, which I did immediately after, you don't see CEO, president of the 76ers. You see he coached his daughter's basketball team to the state championship. Right? I mean, that's what he wrote the book about. He didn't write the book about leadership lessons from the center office. And he was like, man, family dinner, I didn't realize how much I was missing. And I think because of that, his wife booked him on a red-eye flight back home. And so he's sitting in the middle seat, not getting any sleep. But these stories are all around you if you take the time to ask. There's folks who kind of buck that trend, that natural story of what a successful career is. Okay, for those of you that are on the edge of the pier, so I had an inner sanctum yesterday. It was like announced super quickly, and we had like dozens of people come. So those people are on the edge of the pier. Maybe some of you are as well. I like to think about sabbaticals as regret insurance. So there's a famous book by Bronnie Ware. Has anyone had a chance to read it? 5 Regrets of the Dying? All right, I'm going to sell a lot of books for her today. I would highly suggest taking a look. She worked as a palliative care nurse, so end-of-life care, for a couple decades in Australia. And what she found over time is that these people have the same regrets. There's 5 of them, obviously. And the one that is most common is, I wish I had had the courage to live a life authentic to myself, not to other people's expectations. So the first time I was in Alberta was 5 years ago. It was at the tail end of my sabbatical. I had gotten my mom from not eating for days on end to checking herself into a rehab center to 4 months later being sober. And for her 70th birthday, she was like, I've always wanted to go on a long train trip. So took the Rocky Mountaineer from Toronto to Vancouver, which is awesome if you haven't done it. And so she was like, I want to bring my best friend Connie. I haven't spent enough time with her. So her best friend, college roommates, I'd never met her, had heard about her a lot. And so meet Connie, we're having dinner, and as nicely as you can possibly imagine, she's like, so what are you doing? Your mother tells me you quit your job. And I'm like, oh, no. And I'm like, I'm on sabbatical. I don't quite know. And she's like, oh, my God, sabbaticals changed our family's life. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's kind of. And so her husband was an English major. He was a poet. They met. They got married. They had kids super quickly. He went to law school became a lawyer, worked for 25 years, very successful career. All of a sudden, out of the blue, he goes, Connie, I've had this great American novel like in the back, and I've like always wanted to write it. Would you support me if I took some time to write it? She was like, sure. She's a social worker. And so everything was kind of the same, but he would wake up, and instead of rushing off to the office, he would walk his daughters, they had 2 young daughters, to school, walk upstairs, typewriter all day, come down, pick his daughters up from school, make dinner. And after about 3 months, she looked, and he had just shredded the manuscript. And he was like, turns out I don't have it in me. And she was like, oh my God, everyone was sad, but he just had a huge grin on his face. And he's like, at least I know. And he went back, and those next kind of 2 decades before he passed were the happiest of the family that the family can remember. Because he was able to own, like, this is what I do, this is not fully who I am, and I have no regrets, I gave it a shot. So did anyone who was in the room last night when Bozoma was talking, did anyone see her decision to leave all these companies, leave this company, step off the pier as like something that she was making a bad decision, or that she wasn't obviously going to be okay, or that she wasn't extremely courageous and bold and vulnerable, and all these words that we've been saying around this conference the whole time? So like that's the kind of thing I think we need to take as an example for folks that have the courage to do this. So at the very beginning, day one, when Ryan opened it up, he said, listen, we just had 2 horrible years. Like we got through them, let's like not talk about the past, let's talk about the future. I just want to talk about the past just for a second. Like we just lived through the most insane event ever. It's still obviously ongoing, but like the uncertainty and the death and the proximity to that we all experienced. Like, what did you learn? What did you learn about what's important? Did you want to spend more time with your family? Did you want to spend less? Did you want to switch your job? You've all heard about the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffle, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be very easy just to like get right back in that groove and do what you were doing exactly before. But like that was a wake-up call. That was the equivalent of the whole world being shaken and taken into like sabbatical land, right? So the other thing that Ryan suggested was that maybe next year's the 10-year anniversary, huge blowout conference, and he's asked me to come back. And that he suggested that they might think about pausing it after that to kind of figure out what we want to do next. So what I would say is let's hold each other accountable. Because one of the biggest things that folks say about sabbaticals, I could never take a sabbatical right now, oh my God, my life would blow up. Of course. Plan, what are you doing in January 2026? So by next year, let's have a plan of when we're going to take a few months off. Let's get our businesses up to the place where we can leave, and let's hold each other accountable. And let's truly do these things that will make us courageous and vulnerable and bold. And what I would ask is, if we can't do it, folks that are running these amazing companies, folks that obviously have a fair amount of privilege, like who can? And if we don't do it, then the people we work with and the people of all socioeconomic backgrounds will not be able to. We have to create these policies like they've done at Righteous in order to enable people to do it. So how it end is, are you going to take a sabbatical, or are you going to wait for it to take you? And quoting Tyler from last night, are you going to live from a place of love or from a place of fear? Thank you.
That was awesome. We got a few minutes left, so we'll do a bit of Q&A. First of all, hello, my name's Owen, and I'm a workaholic. I was skeptical of this topic probably up to 2 months ago. And when we first got to chatting yesterday, I was like describing where we've been, like where our business has been, where my work life has been, and whatever. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm pretty close actually. And you were like, no, that is it. That is burnout. So could you maybe just to get us started, like what are you looking for? What are we looking for? Because I think that it's ambiguous and it's probably different, a little bit for everybody. But what you've done some study on this. There's actual symptoms of it. It's not a made-up idea anymore. So what is it? What do we need to be looking for in our friends, in our colleagues, in the people we love?
Yeah, so I'll talk about that, but just before I do, I'd like to say, let's not wait until we're burnt out, right? Like, let's just do something because it's awesome, or do something because we don't want to die without having done it. I think that we're in a position now where people are burnt out, but you can plan and just take off in the future, right? So that's the ideal scenario where people aren't waiting until they get to that point, and it's just a part of your normal routine, human ritual to take some times at key moments in our life to take off. As far as burnout, what we found in our study was that there's a clinical definition of burnout with like inefficacy and depression and this, that, and the other. And that's where I think that I was on the DoorDash night. But what we found is there's this kind of state of functional workaholism that, functional alcoholic, they can hide from the people around them that they have this major problem. They're able to be pretty successful and no one really notices. Like what we found is that every person in the study was in some sort of level of this functional workaholism. And how we thought about it was when you stepped back and took that mask off, and by the way, it took most people in our study 6 weeks to truly feel like they were separated from their like identity, their work identity. When you take that mask off, you're like, oh, I don't want to go back to working like that again. So if that's where most of us are, then it's like, how far are you going to let yourself go before something either like happens and you fall off a cliff, versus just saying, I'm going to take this mask off for a little bit. I'm going to set it down. I'm going to go draw for a month because that's what I used to like to do when I was a kid, right? Let's not have it be like addressing a major issue and more like an opportunity.
It's almost like maintenance sabbaticals, rather. Like if you do these more frequently, do they get to be less than 6 months, or
Yeah.
is that what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, do you go to the dentist when you have like a root canal, or do you go hypothetically every 6 months or every year to get a checkup? So like this is like you sleep, right? You take rests. Like there's a bunch of examples in society where it's okay to take a rest. And this narrative that we just graduate from high school or college and then work and then retire, it doesn't even make sense anymore. Like you're going to have 15 jobs over the course of your life. You're going to switch kind of industries 3 times over the course of your life. You owe it to yourself to step back and say, what do I want to do? What extra skills do I need? Do I need more energy and personal resources to make it to the next level? That kind of stuff.
I love the way you pose those questions to yourself, like, what do I need? Where am I going? And I think every year at the gathering, there seems to be a theme of what's sort of like a thread that ties the different sessions together and what the speakers are talking about. Sometimes it's content or corporate culture or corporate purpose. And this year it feels to me a little bit like it's personal purpose. There's a lot of personal, individual you purpose. Are you doing the right thing that we're hearing from the stage this year? When we listen to your story, it's sort of 2 parts. One part is you taking a break, giving yourself rest, taking care of yourself, spending time with your thoughts, like not avoiding things. And then there's this second aspect of it where you were a fintech founder, successful one, and that now here we are, and you're an author and an influencer, more like an activist almost for sabbaticals. So do you go to the sabbatical to find purpose, or do you have your purpose and the sabbatical is meant to help you sort of plan for moving towards it? Maybe you could kind of help. I think there's probably, myself included, many people in here that are sort of not quite sure what purpose is, even at an individual level.
Yeah, I think that's the point, is that one thing we saw in the research and reflecting, I realized, is that you're influenced at a very early age by how your parents work, how early peers work. You're in college and you were in a business major because your parents made you, and then you like did well, and so you did consulting, and then all of a sudden you look back and you're like, what the hell? Like, how did I get here? So you're kind of making these incremental decisions which gets you way over here. And you might want to be over there. But when have you, like a legitimate question, when have you stepped back just to be like, do I want to be doing this? Like I was kind of like, do I want to be a global credit risk expert and go to conferences with bankers for the rest of my life?
Sounds thrilling.
It was amazing. And I said no. And so yeah, I think that we actually, if you step back and you think about it and you retreat from the world a little bit, you will find that you have not probably been intentional about what you're doing, and who you are is changing over time. So I got peace with the fact that that was my dream job, and also I've changed and evolved over time, and my mission has changed and evolved. And so I think those things change, and we're like stuck straight, being like, but I'm the most qualified to be this job. And I think you heard Bozema speak to that a little bit last night. Like, Should I keep doing this? Like, should I be on this mountaintop? Should I climb that mountain? Am I on the right mountain? I think are questions that are really hard to ask when you're like, I am the CMO of this company, I am the CMO of this company, I am the CMO of this company.
Yeah, like this, it's almost like a lack of intentional questioning and know thyself kind of leaves you with that tangled, your self-identity is your work. Like if I stop working, then I'm stop being me and that whole thing. So it's part of this is just separating, creating more separation, I guess.
Yeah. And there's a lot of guilt about that. What happens, like, am I leaving people behind? And, if I take a sabbatical, can everyone else take it? And I think that's on us. Like, we have the responsibility to lead by example and to come back and set up policies so that people, all across our team, all across the industry, feel comfortable taking time off and can financially afford to do so.
Okay, so one last quick question on that note. There's a mixed group. There's some people here that are entrepreneurs, solopreneurs. There's people who are CEOs, CMOs, or leaders of big organizations, small ones. There's people who are, working their way early in their career, or even students. It doesn't feel practical for, I think, probably a lot of people to think about taking 4 months off to walk around or paint or draw pictures and that kind of thing. How do you approach this topic equitably? How do we as a culture shaping industry start to redefine a healthier relationship with work? What's the order of operations here? What do we got to do?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that looking back at when you were kids and you had summer break, right? Like no expert would say summer break is an awesome thing for how kids learn. There's like this summer slide that your test results fall back and like your parents have to freaking schedule you all the time. But like, why do we do summer break? Because it was awesome when we were kids, and we don't want to take that away from our kids, right? And so like, is it ridiculous to spend a month drawing? Like maybe, but like how many, like I took 2 weeks off max for 15 years. Like that's kind of ridiculous. So anyway, what I would say is that be an exemplar, right? Take time off. If you can't take 4 months off, take 4 weeks off. I think at the end of that, you're gonna be like, holy shit, that flew by. That wasn't enough. I wanna take more. It's like a bit of a gateway drug. What I would say is like, we've hopefully planted the seed tonight. Think about it over the course of the next year. Think about like when you can take it, because it's really about being that example so that you can make policy changes both at the company level and at the government level to enable people and to normalize taking time off.
That's awesome. DJ, thank you. Thank you for being with us, and I'm sure that you're around if anyone has questions.
Thanks.